أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين إنه خير ناصر ومعين ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد I know we've been all fasting for a while, so energy levels might be low, but let's sound a louder salawat, please. Salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Thank you. I don't blame you, my own voice is giving out. So Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala أما بعد فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يؤتي الحكمة من يشاء ومن يؤتى الحكمة فقد أوتي خيرا كثيرا وما يذكر إلا أولو الألباب صدق الله العلي العظيم. Dear teachers, ulama, brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Last night, we began our conversation about ways that we can lead a successful life, a good life, and to prepare ourselves for our inevitable transition to our final abode, a transition we call death, to our final abode, the Akhirah. One of the characteristics that the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt emphasize that brings about a good life is this concept, this virtue called hikmah, wisdom, or the discernment to make good decisions that are both true and that are right. They're both true in the sense that they get us to some greater good, and that they are right because they are good decisions. They are based on our values and are a virtue in itself. And so, as was mentioned, wisdom isn't just about knowing certain things, knowing certain facts, isolated facts about my life, about how to do certain things in this world, but it's also about implementing that knowledge in our lives to get to that better life, that good life that we are trying to achieve. So tonight, I'd like to spend some time talking about how the Ahlul Bayt speak about hikmah, about wisdom. Last night we mentioned some of the ayat of the Quran, this ayah of Surah Al-Baqarah, and as well some verses from Surah Luqman, the Hakim that is mentioned in the Quran as a person that Allah has given hikmah to. But tonight I'd like to spend a moment, these few moments that we have together, talking about the ahadith of the Ahlul Bayt, and so focusing on some of the dimensions that the Ahlul Bayt have focused on in their teachings. One of those teachings about wisdom comes from Amirul Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. And that is a teaching that that wisdom ultimately belongs to the believers. This is one that comes in Nahj al-Balagha. It is reported in different ways, but this is one of those ways. Al-hikmatu dhallatul mu'min فَخُذِ الْحِكْمَةِ وَلَوْ مِنْ أَهْلِ النِّفَاقِ. So here, Amir al-Mu'mineen says that hikmah, wisdom, discernment, is the lost treasure of a believer. And so take hikmah, take wisdom from wherever you might find it, even if it were amongst the munafiqeen, the hypocrites, people who hide their intentions and hide their true beliefs. As I mentioned last night, wisdom is shared amongst different traditions in human history. And as well, we might find it amongst other people who are outside of our community, outside of our tradition. In fact, as I mentioned last night, the Quran says that wisdom is bestowed by God and is given to those who have intellect. There's this direct relationship between wisdom and the intellect, that source of guidance that Allah has put within the hearts of all human beings. And so wisdom is as well one of the fruits of that source, of that intellect. In one hadith, Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam he gives a wasiyah, a testament, to his companion Hisham ibn al-Hakam. He explains this verse that we read last night, وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَا لُقْمَانَ الْحِكْمَةَ. He states that this is, it's okay, we don't need the slides for tonight, but that's okay, thank you. It's distracting for me more than it is for you. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَا لُقْمَانَ الْحِكْمَةَ. He states that this wisdom, this hikmah that Allah mentions in this verse, this is al-fahm wal-aql. In another hadith, the Imam explains as one of the soldiers, what part of the army of al-aql is al-hikmah. That's very famous hadith where the Imam describes the creation of aql and then the creation of jahl, where Allah creates these two characteristics of human beings, al-aql, intellect, and al-jahl, ignorance or foolishness. And then Allah creates armies for these two characteristics. On the one hand, aql has its armies, on the other hand, jahl has its armies. One of the soldiers, or part of the army of the intellect, is al-hikmah. So there is this direct connection between intellect and wisdom. And so far as intellect is shared amongst human beings, wisdom as well is shared. And it seems as though the intellect is the source of wisdom, and so wisdom then becomes all of the dictates of the intellect itself. Now, let's bring it down to how we commonly use wisdom. And my point here is that sometimes we can actually find plenty of wisdom in our society and amongst our neighbors and maybe amongst our co-workers. Sometimes when we use wisdom in our daily language, we might say, for example, a person is wise who can use his money well. Person who is money wise. He knows how to, for example, save in the right way. He knows when to spend his money, how much to spend, and so on. I just come from the East where bargaining is a daily routine of life, where the price tag is just a suggestion. And so sometimes when we are going back there, we might be a little bit shocked at how much, the prices go up, but then you can bargain it down, right? So sometimes wisdom requires knowing your surroundings. When you're in the East, you bargain. When you're in the West, and you bargain, so for example, with your register clerk, then they might sort of not know what you're talking about, right? You can't go to the clerk and ask them for a discount. So a person who knows how to use their money, where to spend and where to save, we'll say that person is wise with their money. Or a person who knows how to manage their time. They are being wise with their time. Or for example, we might say a person is a wise man or a wise woman. We might think about, so for example, somebody with a long beard, back in the day with a pointy hat and so on. But it's basically a person who makes good judgments about their life, right? They know the day-to-day judgments, how to spend their time, for example, where to spend their time, how to spend their money, and how to deal with other people in a good way. And then also they know what are the important priorities in their life. How to not only think about the day-to-day, but also the long trajectory of their life. And so we might, in our society, call this a wise man. And we might go and ask advice from them. But Islam, and particularly the words of the Ahlul Bayt, they teach us that wisdom is not just about thinking that this insight or this discernment comes from yourself, or is a creation, for example, of my mind, or simply arises from the goodness of my character, something that I have cultivated on my own, that somehow it springs out of my own self. Rather, this is actually a gift of Allah that He has bestowed upon humankind. That without Allah, we would not know even how to deal with our day-to-day, our ins and our outs, knowing how to even, for example, make good decisions and have that good discernment. So Allah, He says that He has bestowed wisdom and hikmah on whoever He wills. In this ayah of Surah Al-Baqarah, He says, يُؤْتِ الْحِكْمَةَ مَنْ يَشَاءُ. He gives and He bestows hikmah on whoever He wills. Now we might think that Allah only bestows hikmah on the Muslims, on the people of our community, on the mu'mineen. But in fact, and this might be our own experience, we might find wisdom sometimes more in our co-workers than we find it in ourselves and amongst ourselves. My co-worker, for example, might know how to spend his time better, might know how to climb the corporate ladder much better than I can. Or, for example, my classmate in college. He might know which classes to choose or how to spend his time studying more efficiently or more wisely than I can. And Islam, now, it comes and encourages us to go and learn from the wisdom of my coworker, or go and learn the wisdom from my fellow student. Because in the end of the day, al-hikmatu dallatul mu'min. The mu'min goes and tries to find wisdom wherever he might find it. But the difference though is that a mu'min knows where the source of that wisdom is. And whenever he picks up that wisdom, that treasure that he has lost, it redirects him back to Allah, because he knows that God has given that person wisdom, and now God is giving me that source of wisdom, that discernment on how to use my time, how to use my money, what types of relationships I should be engaging in, all of those things through that person. That person becomes a medium for Allah to grant me the blessing of that wisdom. And so we come back to the words of Amirul Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, al-hikmatu dhallatul mu'min. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. فَخُذِ الْحِكْمَةَ وَلَوْ مِنْ أَهْلِ النِّفَاقِ. In other words, we should not be afraid of learning wisdom, of reacquiring this treasure that we have lost wherever we might find it, and learning the good habits from other people. In the end of the day, if the source of that intellect, if the source of that wisdom is ultimately an inspiration of Allah, then we should be willing to acquire the gifts of God wherever we might find it. But there is a distinction here, a very important distinction that Amirul Mu'mineen makes, and that is وَلَوْ مِنْ أَهْلِ النِّفَاقِ. So Amirul Mu'mineen here, he is pointing to the fact that you might find that wisdom in a person who does not, whose values do not align with your values, whose intentions might be hidden from you. And so the wisdom that you get from that person needs to be taken in a wise way. Don't just think, okay, well now this person does all of these things, individual day-to-day things, has all of these good habits, and maybe then his values are good. Maybe then I should align my values with his values. Maybe I should reframe my life based on his life. No. Understand that some people might do some things well, but you need to now take those treasures and plug it back into the values of your entire life. Plug it back into the values of, and in the terms of the priorities of your life. And so, in other words, Islam teaches us, the Ahlul Bayt teach us that wisdom isn't just learning about how to deal with your money in a wise way, or spend your time wisely, or efficiently to get to a particular goal, a material goal that I may have set as a ultimate end, but rather to think about my ultimate purpose in life in terms of that journey back to Allah. Sometimes I say, these might sound like cliche types of use of wisdom, but even in our own society, the highest wisdom, the highest sort of attainment that a person can have is sort of very fulfilling experiences that they might have. And we might think that a wise person is a person with a lot of experience and who knows how to prioritize his life based on those experiences. So sometimes a person might try to live a good life by acquiring as many, even though they might be deep and qualitative, but by as many experiences as they can. They have the fullest experiences. They go on the farthest journeys. They might go to different cities or to different countries to acquire all of those experiences. They might eat the best foods, for example, go to the best restaurants because they want to acquire the best experiences. And then, if they are really wise, they will try to reflect on those experiences as well, to figure out what those experiences can teach them about a good life. But Islam tells us that wisdom is not just in going on different journeys or travels to different countries, or even to having a good career, just so that you can get as many experiences as possible. Sometimes we might think even that wisdom requires us to focus on the most important things in life, on family, on community. So for example, instead of caring for myself, I might try to care for my family. Or instead of, for example, constantly working and being in that rat race, I might say, well, I should give back to my community. That is what wisdom requires of me. But then that is the extent of what we think of as wisdom. The Ahlul Bayt now come and change this understanding. They say true wisdom is when you set your life according to the priority, the highest priority, that all human beings recognize, but they might not fully appreciate. And that is that our lives are simply a journey back to Allah. And that is our ultimate priority. Our ultimate relationship is our relationship with Allah, not our relationship with ourselves, not our relationship even with our families or our communities. But all of these are trials in terms of our relationship with Allah. So if that is our highest priority, a relationship with Allah is our most important value in our lives, then wisdom becomes a means for and the discernment to order my life in terms of my relationship with Allah. I mentioned this hadith last night. It's a hadith of our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam. The Imam says, إِنَّ الْحِكْمَةَ الْمَعْرِفَةُ وَالتَّفَقُّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. That hikmah, wisdom, true wisdom, again, it's not about the day-to-day or even my material life, my short life on this world, but rather it is about a deep understanding, a deep comprehension of my religion. In another hadith, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir says that wisdom is ta'atullah wa ma'rifatul imam. It is obedience of Allah and knowing and understanding and recognizing my Imam. And then he continues, وَاجْتِنَابُ الْكَبَائِرِ الَّتِي أَوْجَبَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهَا النَّارِ. And for me to stay away from those cardinal and greatest sins that Allah has ordained the hellfire for. So thinking about, again, my ultimate relationship with Allah. The cardinal sins like, for example, associating partners with Allah. Losing hope in the grace of God, that Allah can forgive me. And He may if I ask sincerely and I turn away from my evil deeds. Or that Allah is now not able to hold me accountable for my actions. These are some of the greatest sins that have been that have been mentioned in some of our ahadith. That thinking that I am now out of the clutches or out of the realm of Allah. And so knowing deeply about our religion then becomes a part of wisdom. So two things just from this hadith. First, that wisdom, it is about knowing how to use the resources that Allah has given in my life, that He has placed and that He has bestowed upon me in the proper way. And if hikmah is about ma'rifah, it is about tafaqquh fi din, then these as well become a part of my religion. Knowing how to use wisely the blessings that Allah has given is a part of my religion, and it becomes a religious duty. It requires us to learn how to manage, for example, our time, not to waste our hours away on our phones or on our computers, but also to now come and have fulfilling experiences, for example, with our families, with our communities, and so on. But the second thing is that the hadith says, don't set the bar low. It tells us that you cannot be a wise person. However much other people around you might consider you wise, I cannot be a wise person if I don't set my priorities straight in terms of my relationship with Allah. So for example, I might say that such and such person is wise with his money. But if he is just storing that money away for himself, or he just likes to see his bank account grow and grow, that is not a wise person anymore. Wisdom is not just an instrument for me to get to a goal that I have set, but rather it is for me to get to the highest priority of my life. That person who just simply stores his money is not wise. Rather, proper wisdom is that which allows me and helps me to obey Allah's command. So for example, people might say that it is unwise for you to give 1/5 of your wealth to a person, might be a scholar, is a marji, for example, or he gives you authority to spend it in a particular way. You have no oversight over that money, and you have no idea about how that money is going to be spent, whether it's going to be spent efficiently and wisely and so on or not. People might call that unwise, but because this is part of my obeying Allah's command, then this is paying khums, paying 1/5 of my accumulated net wealth from the previous fiscal year becomes the wisest thing that I could possibly do with my money. Or for example, giving charity to my family, to my friends, or even to a total stranger. Because it is in relation to Allah, it is a journey to Allah, it is a means to obeying Allah's command, that becomes a wise decision. And so in one hadith, Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam says, من زهد في الدنيا أثبت الله الحكمة في قلبه وأنطق به لسانه. A person who does not put his hopes, he does not put his desires in this world, does not desire this world for itself, and is more concerned about his long-term journey, his long-term goals, his final destination, then God, He establishes wisdom in his heart and makes his tongue speak with that discernment and that wisdom. In other words, a person with true wisdom knows the ultimate priority of his life, and then God reciprocates by allowing the seed of that hikmah to grow in his heart. And this brings me to my final point. How do we practically inculcate and allow that wisdom to grow in our hearts and for us to acquire that hikmah in our lives and to implement that hikmah in our lives? The ahadith tell us that we need to set the stage for God to bestow us with these virtues. These next few nights we're going to talk about not just wisdom, but some of the other virtues, some of the other characteristics that we have to cultivate in ourselves to allow us to attain that good life, that successful life. But then Allah says, or rather the ahadith tell us that Allah, He is looking for us to prepare ourselves to receive those bounties. That there are certain things that prepare our souls for that wisdom. Let me just mention two hadith here. In one hadith, Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, he says, اغلب الشهوة تكمل لك الحكمة. Have command and control over your desire, and then wisdom will become completed in your heart. In other words, being able to control myself, my physical desires, my spiritual and psychological desires. For example, my desire to get ahead at whatever cost, to cut corners wherever I can. Or for example, my desire to have things that other people have that I simply don't have. Those material desires that kind of creep into our hearts. To stay away from those desires, or at least to control them within myself. That is one of the ways to attain that wisdom. Because it allows the intellect. If I'm able to control my desires, those desires do not become blinders in front of my eyes. And it allows my intellect to see more clearly and to understand the more important things in life. If I'm constantly thinking about what I don't have, the material things that I don't have, the wealth and the relationships that I don't have, all of the things that, for example, I want and are just out of my reach, and that's nafs, that lower soul is constantly speaking in my ear, then I don't allow my intellect to discern for me what are the most important things in life. Sometimes this nafs al-ammara, this lower soul, is described as an animal. Sometimes it's described as a horse that needs to be reined in. I don't know how many of you are familiar with sort of horses and have kind of struggled with horses or ridden horses. You have to rein in the horse and know how to deal with the horse, be in command and control of the horse. Otherwise, it will take you wherever it wants. And so, this nafs al-ammara is sometimes described in this way, that you have to control it, otherwise it will control you. And so, and in another hadith, the Imam describes the soul as a land or as a soil that needs to be cultivated. And a soil, as some of us might be familiar with, if you want to garden in soil, you need to have that soil be soft. It needs to be nutritious. Otherwise, nothing grows in that field. If you want to grow vegetables or plants or flowers, you need to till the land. Otherwise, all of the seeds that you pour in, it's not going to grow. Some of our hadith, they describe the soul in this way, in terms of soil, in terms of a land or a field that needs to be cultivated. In one hadith, Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam says that the heart is like that field. If your heart is soft, then it will allow the virtues to grow. If your soil is hard and it is dry, then it does not allow any crops to grow. فَكَذَلِكَ الْحِكْمَةِ تَعْمُرُ فِي قَلْبِ الْمُتَوَاضِعِ وَلَا تَعْمُرُ فِي قَلْبِ الْمُتَكَبِّرِ. Wisdom grows in a humble heart, a heart that has softened, that is the soil has been broken apart, that is nutritious. In that type of heart, a heart which is humble, which is modest, in that type of heart, wisdom can grow. But it does not grow in a proud one, a heart that has been hardened with pride and with takabbur, with vanity and with all of the things that stops us from receiving that wisdom. In other words, humility softens our heart and it allows for the fruits and the bounties of God to flourish in our soul. It can accept the blessings of God, in other words, from wherever it might come from people that we accept as authorities, from our teachers, from our elders, and even maybe from some of our religious scholars, but also from people we might not accept their authority, from people who are younger than us, or even someone who comes and now criticizes me. Maybe I will be accepting of their wisdom. Maybe Allah has planted a discernment or a good word in their heart or on their tongue, and now Allah is giving me that wisdom through their tongue. But just because I am a proud person, I am a vain person, I am a person who is not willing to accept criticism from anyone, then that takabbur stops the wisdom from entering into my heart. And so Imam Musa al-Kadhim is saying that soften your heart through that humility, so that wisdom can enter into our heart. Oh Allah, I will end here. We can turn towards doing a final dua. We ask Allah to soften our hearts with that humility, with that modesty, to allow that wisdom to cultivate and to grow in our hearts and in our souls. We ask Allah to increase our ma'rifah, our tafaqquh, our understanding and our comprehension of our deen and of our religion, to increase our understanding and our recognition of our Imam. And as well, we ask Allah to increase our wisdom in our hearts so that we can get closer to Him and have a better relationship ultimately with Him and with Him alone. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi tahirin. Can stand for ziyarat. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم أنت السلام ومنك السلام ولك السلام وإليك يعود السلام سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام على الأئمة الهادين المهديين. السلام على جميع أنبياء الله ورسله وملائكته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام على علي أمير المؤمنين. السلام على فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام على الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة أجمعين. السلام على علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي. السلام على الحجة ابن الحسن القائم المهدي عجل الله تعالى فرجه وسهل الله مخرجه وجعلنا من أعوانه وأنصاره وشيعته والمستشهدين بين يديه. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. صلوات
You can't. It's for Maulana. It's for Maulana. No, no, no. It's for Maulana, Zan. Zan, no. It's for Maulana. It's not for kids. Come on, let's go. Let's go.